This morning we're going to be talking about Deborah and just going over some things with that. And we hope that those of you who will be watching live today have stayed safe during the storm and will continue to be safe the rest of this week. And we hope that you enjoy the study this morning. Okay, so Deborah is in Judges 4 and 5, and it's so unique because when I first started looking this up, I thought, wow, two whole chapters about her. But then I realized that the chapter 5 is all about this song that she sang, that they sang together once they defeated the Canaanites. And it was just awesome to see how that God worked through this. Just a little background. Deborah was married to Labadoth. She was a prophet. She came to be known as the leader of the Israelite nation. She is referred to a lot of times as the mother of Israel. So it's, to me, she had to have huge shoulders. I mean, this just seems like so much responsibility and it's just awesome. She was a judge for 40 years. She was chosen by God. She, along with the army commander Barak and another person we're going to learn about, defeated Sisera and the Canaanites. But, it wasn't that Deborah went out on the battlefield. It was that God used her to give direction on who to call on and who to use and who to be the backbone of this. And then, of course, she sang a song with Barak. And a lot of people, when I was reading and studying and going through some different books and stuff, a lot of people seem to think that she may have actually been the one who wrote the song, that, it was something that she composed herself. Because she was a woman who liked to always make sure, she always made sure that God got the credit, not herself. For everything that she was a part of, she always wanted to make sure that the people who received the goodness of it understood that it was by the grace of God. It was by the message of God. It was because God used her and she allowed herself to be used that she was able to do the things that she, did. She was not a prideful woman at all that felt like, oh, look at me, I'm so good. When we start in chapter 4, we've just come out of the period where the previous judge, which was Judge Ehud, I don't know if I'm saying that, Ehud, had died. So Deborah was a judge during the third period. There were several periods of time where the Israelites, God would deliver them, they would fall back in sin. They would have to go through sin, and then they would cry out to God, and He would hear their hearts when when they got sincere, and then He would rescue them again. Sometimes they would stay out of trouble for a long period of time. Sometimes it would be a short period of time, but they would always fall right back in. And when I was studying this, I thought about how they're kind of like us. We keep walking around that hole that's in the floor, keep walking down the same street, falling in that same hole over and over and over and over instead of taking a different route. And I thought, golly, that's just like, I can see the Israelites doing that. Because I'm like, when I first read it, I was like, okay, now how does God keep getting you out of the frying pan and you just keep jumping back in it? And then it was like He hit my spirit and He was like, well, what do you do? Mm-hmm. How many times have you been in and out of church? How many times have you, been on fire for me and then got quiet and hid back in the backgrounds? How many times have I asked you to do something that because of fear you wouldn't step outside of your box and do that? And then I thought, whoa, this is very relevant to us today simply because this is us. Mm-hmm. Deborah is each one of us. She's a wife. She has, responsibilities at home that she has to take care of. We have responsibilities at home. She, was a prophetess. She was a counselor. She was a guide. She was somebody that people came to. So we're like that. We all have people who come to us at different times. So we have those same responsibilities that she has. But where we might differ is, do we trust like Deborah trusted? You know, can we have the kind of faith that she has? And I'm here to say we can. It's going to take fasting and prayer and dedication on our parts, but we can. We have that Deborah, you know, that's growing inside of us. We just have to learn to feed her. We have to learn to trust her and to trust God's guidance and to keep stepping outside of those boxes and keep, you know, doing what God would have us to do. So the third period of the rescue of Israel was when Deborah comes into the picture. Now, the first period lasted for about 8 years, and then they had a break, and then the second one lasted for about 18 years. And when I say time periods of when the judges were there, that's when they were in the oppression stages, and the judges were there to help pull them out. So a cycle of disobedience. They were dominated by the Canaanites. In this particular one, previously, when they had defeated the Canaanites, God had told them to get rid of all of them. Kill them all, run them all out, whatever. Well, they didn't. They disobeyed God. They didn't kill all of them. So because they didn't, now the Canaanites have been able to come back and oppress them again because they didn't get rid of all of them in the very beginning. So here they are, and they are, you know, regrouped and re-strengthened and gotten this huge army again, and now they are again over the Israelites. And during this time, it's King Jabin of Hazor, which we don't read a whole lot about King Jabin. I mean, his name is mentioned just a couple of times because the main point of this is Deborah and how she worked with God and how she trusted God and how she, you know, gained this great respect with the people to be able to lead them out of this period. She came into play about 20 years into the oppression stage. So they had done been suffering, they had done been, you know, being abused and murdered and raped and into slavery and all kinds of different things that were happening during those 20 years before Deborah came in. She was the first female judge, only female judge that I could find any mention of anywhere. To my knowledge, she's the only female judge that was ever used in the book.
It says the fourth and only female judge of Israel.
So she was the fourth judge, and she was the only female judge. And I want y'all to think about what that means. She could have gotten the big head and turned this completely around and made it all about her. But I believe she was so successful because she did right the opposite of that. She gave God all the glory. You know, a lot of churches and a lot of religions have a lot of different beliefs about what a female's part should be and what she should and should not do. But I'm here to tell you, it don't matter what a man says, it's what God says. Mm-hmm. So whenever God's telling you to step out of your box and do something, trust Him. Trust God. Trust that He has a plan for that. And don't always look to man to give you their approval, because they're not going to. You know, God created us for a purpose, every one of us. He didn't say He just created the men for a purpose. He created all for a purpose. And so regardless of what our person is, whether we're male or female, whether we're, you know, rich or poor, whether we have made good choices or bad choices our whole life, we're still usable, and God can still turn all that around if we'll just trust the way that Deborah trusted. So now in chapter 4, verses 1 through 24, these are primarily, well, this is Deborah's story. I mean, this is primarily where we learn about all that she did and all that she meant to this nation and everything. So the previous judge had died, and once again, the Israelites have fallen back into their evil ways, and they've called out for God to, you know, to come rescue them from King Jabin. Well, King Jabin had an army, like all kings do, and Sisera was the commander of his army. And Sisera was feared by many. I imagine him as being a strong-shouldered, powerful, probably handsome, you know, man that just demanded respect from people. He just, he had that aura about him. And in his army, he had 900 iron chariots. And when I first read that, I thought, why is that important? Why is it important that God felt it necessary to tell us 900 chariots? Well, then I started researching iron chariots and what that meant. These chariots were like an army tank. It was the most powerful weapon they had. A lot of them had these long knives that came out of the spokes of the wheel, so that as the wheels were turning, this spoke would just mutilate anything that came in contact with it. Mm-hmm. So the foot soldiers could just be wiped out in no time. I mean, the man on the chariot didn't even have to do anything but drive. And he could just wipe out hundreds of them at a time. And so then I started seeing the picture of why it's important that we know what these 900 iron chariots. Can you imagine walking up to a battlefield and seeing 900 army tanks? No. I mean, that's essentially what is about to happen here.
Especially in that day and time.
And that's not to mention the foot soldiers and the horsemen and all the other people that he had under his command. The Bible just mentions these 900, how important these 900 iron chariots were, drawn by the best of the best horses, the most powerful, the strongest horses, probably the strongest horsemen, to handle them, to stand up on that chariot. Because I can imagine that's not a very easy job. I mean, when you think about it, because you're standing and driving. On all the pictures that I found, there's always a little small vessel that you're standing in, and you have the reins and a little thing usually in front of you, but that's it. You're not strapped in, you're not seat belted in, you're not girded anywhere to hold you steady. You got to have some strong legs and some strong abs to be able to do that.
Not telling how long you have to be in that
Right. Yeah,
so just to be able to stand that long.
Absolutely. And then at the speed at which these chariots are moving, because it's the strongest horses, so there's like this flood of strength that's coming with this. So it's a pretty powerful beast, that they're going to be searching at here. And then at this point was when God really started talking to me about how we walk down that same road and just keep stepping in that hole. And I thought, God, why do you keep bringing that to my memory? Why do you keep bringing that up, when you're talking about these chariots? Well, because I've seen those chariots standing there. It wasn't this physical iron chariot, but I've seen chariots in my way when God would ask me to do something. Mm-hmm. And what did I do? Instead of stopping and going around, finding a different path, I just barreled right into that block, that blockade that was there, without asking God for direction, without asking Him to give me victory over it, without asking for God's permission or anything. I just barrel forward. Or I would do right the opposite and turn around and run. Run backwards, say, not doing this. So I felt like that because God kept bringing that forward to me, that was one of the key points that He wanted us to understand was, it's just such a battle that we have to go through. And they went through these same battles every day. People think that the Old Testament is not relevant to us in today's time, but I believe totally different. The scenarios are different, the situations are different, but we can apply them to our life if we just will. Everybody wants to read the New Testament, and the New Testament's got some great stuff in it because that's where we learn, of Jesus and how He died for our sins and stuff. But there's so many lessons that we can learn from the Old Testament that we can apply to our life and grow from them and not have to keep running into these brick walls and falling down into these holes. During this time, like I said, was only possible because the Israelites did not do what they were supposed to do in the beginning. They were supposed to destroy and get rid of all the Canaanites and they didn't. So Canaanites were still left in their land. So this is the only time period in which Israelite was faced with enemies in their own land. The rest of the time, it was outside enemies coming in. But here in this part, they're on their own land. They're in their own place, a place that they've already, defeated somebody, and God's given them this property, but yet, because they didn't do what God asked them to do previously, they've had to face this oppression for 20 years. When we go down to verse 5, it talks about this tree that Deborah sat under. And it actually says she would sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites would go to her for judgment. There again, I was like, why is it so important for us to know where she sat? And I think the importance is not necessarily where she sat, but that God had a special place for her. Mm-hmm. That she wasn't out here going around judging people and gossiping and doing all these things that we as females get accused of doing and quite honestly are sometimes guilty of doing. But she had this special place that God had set aside. And I believe this was probably the most beautiful palm tree that was in this area at that time. And then I was like, okay, why the importance of a palm tree? Well, if you remember in many scriptures, we read of how the palm tree sheltered people because of the big leaves and how heavy they were and how they would shelter them from the sun. So here again, God not only placed her in a high position, but He's protected her. He's given her a protection. So He just goes to show, number one, how much He loved and trusted her, but also how much she loved and trusted Him. That He would give her this beautiful palm tree to sit under and have the people come to her for direction. So one day she's sitting under the palm tree and she gets direction from God. So she sends for Barak. Now, just like Jabin had an army, the Israelites have an army also. And Barak is the army commander. And so she sends for him and tells him, look, God has told you that He, told me He wants you to do something, so I want you to do it. So let's read in verse 6. It says, one day she sent for Barak, son of Abinum, who lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali. She said to him, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Notice she doesn't say, this is what I want you to do, but she says to him, this is what the Lord commands that you do. So there again, she's always making sure God's out front getting the praise. Call out 10,000 warriors from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun at Mount Tabor. So she tells him right away what God's expecting him to do. Now, he has a decision to make. He can accept this from God and move forward, or he can walk away. It's his choice. We have those same choices every day. We can do what God's asking us to do on a daily basis, or we can turn and walk away. But just like he would have consequences to his choices, and the Israelites would have to face consequences of his choices, so do we and the people who love us and support us when we walk away. So when you're getting direction from God, I want you to always think about the fact that it's not just you that it's going to affect. Because God can use anybody.
That's right.
And if you choose not to take the direction that He gives you, then and do as Deborah did, then he says, okay, He'll find another Deborah. So don't misunderstand. God don't have to have us, but God wants us. He wants to use us. He created a job for us, and He wants to help us to be the best that we can be. And so she, tells him of what he wants and all, and then, and he says to her, well, in verse 8, he says, I will go, but only if you will go with me. When I first read that, I thought, this guy wants a woman to go out on the battlefield with him because he's too afraid to go out and do it by himself. That was my first thought. But then as I read more about Barak and started studying a little bit about him and looking up things that he had done while he was in command and all, I don't think that's what it was at all. I think that it was more of a level of respect that he had for Deborah. I think that it had nothing to do with Barak himself as far as him being afraid. But I think he felt so strongly in her relationship with God and with her direction with God that he wanted her there. He wanted to know if the plans changed, if something went awry, if something was going to change. He didn't want a messenger to have to come and tell him that. He wanted to be able to hear it, if you will, right from the horse's mouth. He wanted to be able to hear her make those changes and be able to know that it came from her through God and that was the thing. And I think the reason that was is because he knew those 900 chariots, those iron chariots were there. So I think in his heart he's thinking, okay, so, we're going to go up on this battlefield, and what if these 900 chariots come out and my men flee? Is God going to give me new direction, or is he just going to send me down alone? There's no telling what kinds of things went through his mind. But I believe that he believed in God, and he believed this direction had come through Deborah from God. And so I believe that he immediately said, I'll go if you'll go with me. Because he respected her, and he respected that she was strong, had a strong relationship with God, and that he wanted her there. So then,
My Bible says that his request showed that at heart he trusted human strength more than God's promise.
oh, that's
But then
good.
it says a person of real faith steps out on God's command even if he must go alone.
That's very good. That's a new insight.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a different insight. It's not new. I mean, it's different. Because how many times have we done that? How many times have we trusted our own strength,
Yeah.
and not trusted a man of God or somebody who'd given us a direct command or a direct... have any of y'all ever been prophesied over before? Ever had somebody prophesy over you before? When I was in the Holiness Church, I was in a meeting one time, and that happened, and it's very profound because you feel like you're being drawn out for a purpose, but you're also very scared because you're being drawn out for a purpose. You feel like, okay, what does this person see in me that would have them say these things? And so there again, we don't trust the message from God a lot of times because it's coming through a human. We think God always has to speak to us individually. But sometimes he does use other people to come and speak to us. Just like he spoke to Barak through Deborah, he did trust her and trusted what she said. Well, in verse 8, she tells him, I will, verse 8 was when he asked her. And so in verse 9, she says, very well, she replied, I will go with you. But you will receive no honor in this venture. For the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman. Now, never studying Deborah before, my first thought was, okay, she's going to get all the honor and the glory for this victory because she had to go out on the battlefield with him. Mm-hmm. So that was my first thought. It wasn't until I really started studying, because like I said, I'd never studied Deborah, never read anything about it. It wasn't until then that I realized there's another strong female that's going to come into play into this. She's not speaking about herself here because she was not a vain woman. She, trusted God with everything. She was just not the kind of person that would say, well, if I go out on the battlefield with you, I'm going to be the one getting the glory, not you. Mm-hmm. And so I realized that, okay, it couldn't be talking about her. It must be talking about, somebody else. So they go up to the mountain. They take the 10,000 warriors that, God had told them to take. and Deborah goes with him. And so that's where we're at in verse 9, is where she, has accepted he accepts the statement that she's made. And I believe the reason why Barak accepted that statement is because it wasn't just about the victory to him. It wasn't about him getting praise for the victory. It was just about the victory itself. It was about finally being able to get the Israelites back out from under the suppression of King Jotham. And of course, Sisera was a big part in that oppression because he was the one leading it. He was the one that was probably out there doing the killings and, all the things that was taking place, the beatings and different stuff. He was either a direct person involved in it, or he was the one probably given the commands to the different ones to do that. So I want to skip through a couple of verses here, but I want to just kind of bring them up. Y'all remember Moses had his father-in-law's relative, his brother-in-law, I think it was. Let me look at that right quick. Hold on. All right, verse 11. Now, Heber the Kenite, a descendant of Moses' brother-in-law, Hobab, had moved away from the other members of his tribe and had pitched his tent by the oak. So here we have, here's the army, down here of the Canaanites. Up here we have the Israelites' army. And then over here on another hillside, we've got this brother-in-law of Moses that has pitched his tent. That's going to come into play several ways. One, some people believe that that the people who were there, that the man who was in charge of that tent was the one that went down and told the Canaanites that the Israelites were there and kind of gave them direction as to where they were going to be at. But this tent is also going to become a kind of a haven and a death temple all in one later on in the story. So it wasn't by just accident that this particular tent was pitched in this particular spot. So do you see where God's going with that? Sometimes things that we don't see or understand, we can't figure out, that looks out of place, but yet God has a purpose for it. Sometimes we may look at ourselves and say, gosh, I look out of place here. I feel out of place here. I'm not like, I don't belong to this group and I don't belong to this group. I'm out here. Well, you know what? This tent that was out of place, that was alone, becomes one of the most important parts of the victory of this battle. So what does that say to us? If God's going to take this tent and cause this tent to mean so much to this victory, what's he going to do with our tents? When he's asking us to step out and be different, when he's asking us to be set apart, to be on the outside looking in, or to be on the inside looking out. Do you see what I'm saying? He wants us to be an intricate part of his plan. But he can only do that if we're willing to do what we need to do, if we're willing to step out into these places that we need to do. So we go on to verses 15 and 17, and this is where the battle begins. Now, in the book, the Bible that I have, this chronological life application Bible, it reads a lot differently than the New King James and the King James did. But it's just the wording. But it says that in verse 15 that when Barak attacked, that the Lord threw Sisera and all of his chariots and warriors into a panic. Now, I was watching a clip about Deborah on, it might have been on YouTube. But in this clip, they showed like the rain's falling and it was muddy and it was, just a horrible mess where these chariots were coming from. And I don't know if that was the case and don't care if that was the case, because I know that God can throw things into chaos anytime he wants to.
And bring it right back to order.
And then bring them right back to order. So here are the Canaanites and the Israelites. And, the Canaanites are down in this valley and they're up on this hill and they're coming together. So these 10,000 men are facing these 900 iron chariots, which I'm sure are in the forefront. And then behind them, there's no telling how many foot soldiers and all this that are falling behind them. And I can't even begin to imagine the fear that they're faced with. But I know what my own fear has been, and I know how I've seen my own fears at times. And I thought, okay, sometimes I just have to remind myself, just breathe. Just breathe. Just take a breath. Trust God. Trust that the plan he's laid out before you, trust that you've gotten direction for him, that you're following his lead. And then move. And so I imagine that's what these guys had to do. They just had to trust that this message had came from God, and that their commander, Barak, was not leading them in for the slaughter, but was leading them into slaughter.
Yeah.
They had to have this umph in their step and this, pulling their shoulders back and just breathing and saying, we got this. God's on our side. We're going to move forward. We're doing what he asked us to do.
Amen.
We're fighting for the Israelite army. We're not fighting for ourselves. We're out here on this battlefield for God. We are his army. And so imagine when they pull their shoulders back and they start moving forward, that they just have this sense of aura about them, this of joy and pride, and just God's on our side. So I don't, God could have brought the sun out and blinded all the chariot drivers and caused the horses to go blind or caused the wheels to fall off. I don't know what he did. But I know that he caused confusion and he caused this ruckus to happen so that these men were not torn apart as the Canaanites had intended for them to be, but that they were instead pushed forward. And they, were able to take over this army and to kill them. And this time they did. They killed them all. They didn't just say, okay, well, we've got the front half done, so now let's back off. We can relax. We've taken care of the chariots. All the chariots are down. The horses are down. The men are killed. So we got this. They kept moving forward. They kept moving forward with the plan that God had placed them until they were all killed. Well, Sisera runs like a little girl. He gets off his little chariot. Once it wrecks, I'm visioning this in my head. And, he's up front. He's all powerful. And then, kaboom, he's down on the ground. So he gets up like a little girl and he just runs. He just runs. Not that I think little girls are the only ones that run, mind you, but, that's just a saying. But so, where does he run to?
The tent.
To the tent. To this seemingly unimportant
Not smart.
tent that is placed up on this hillside
He didn't think
alone. He goes to it. Well, he goes to it knowing that it is a tent of a person who is a friend of the Canaanites, who, is a close friend of the king's and all this stuff. And so he goes to it with that in mind. So that leads me to believe that he knew it had to be there. So that's where the possibility that maybe the man of the tent was the one who told him what was coming. So because he knew where this tent was, it wasn't like he was just out there blindly running around in the forest or on the hillside trying to hide a rock, find a rock to get under and hide. He went to this tent. Well, he goes to this tent, the tent of Jael, who is the wife of Heber, and I can imagine that Jael was probably much like Deborah, a very beautiful woman, caught the eye, But she had inner beauty because she trusted God, and she believed that God had a plan for her life. And she believed that he would give her direction in whatever needed to take place. So Jael steps outside of her tent, and she's like, come on in. Yeah, come in, Now, back in those days, a man didn't go into another woman's tent. I mean, you just didn't do that. Mm-hmm. But Jael wasn't afraid. She wasn't afraid of repercussions that was going to come from that. And I believe she wasn't afraid because she believed God and believed that God had a plan for her life for that day. So Sisera, he goes into the tent and he, just cover me, hide me, type thing. Well, and he's thirsty because he's been running, so she gets him some milk and probably, milk and honey. She may have even given him some bread. I don't know. And, she warms his tummy up and he lays back down and she covers him again. And then she waits for him to fall asleep. Well, back in this time, the men, a lot of times, who were over these harems and over these households, they didn't do a lot of the manual labor. They were the person who told everybody else what to do. So Jael is used to the big hammers, and she's used to the pegs to put the tents up, because she's usually one of the ones that's out there pitching the tent. Mm-hmm. So she's strong and she's powerful. She knows how to use the hammer. She knows how to use the peg. So did God choose her by accident? I mean, was it just accident that he happened to be there? No. Deborah prophesied way back at the beginning of this that it was going to be a strong, powerful woman.
God put her there for a purpose.
Yep.
She had a purpose well before she's ever even mentioned. And that's the way we are. We have a purpose well before we even know it.
That's right.
God has purposed our life for a reason, well before we even come into play of him giving us direction for that. Mm-hmm. So he falls asleep, and she creeps up to him as he's laying there sleeping. And it doesn't say that, she doesn't hit him in the head with the hammer or anything. It says she puts this tent pole in his temple. Now, I'm thinking, okay, he's laying there asleep. I'm probably petrified. My knees are shaking. My hands are shaking. Mm-hmm. I'm going to knock this fool uncold before I even try to position this peg on his head and then hit it to knock it through. But she had such confidence in herself because of the message that God had already given her, because I don't believe she came up with this plan on her own. God directed her to do this. So she has such confidence in her ability to be able to carry out God's plan and trust that he gave her the strength to do it, that she puts this in his temple right here and whoosh, drives this nail all the way through his temples and into the ground. So she virtually stakes his head down to the ground. Now, at any time, he could have felt her presence. She could have breathed on him. Anything could have happened that he would have woke up and probably attacked her. But that wasn't God's plan.
You go back to verse 9, it says, for the Lord's victory over Caesarea will be at the hands of a woman. So it tells you.
It does. And like I said, I thought that was talking about Deborah in the beginning. And I was excited when I found out it wasn't. I couldn't understand about this okay, a tent sitting up on a hill, big deal. Some family sitting up there. But then when it started talking about him coming into this tent, I was like, oh, there's a strong, powerful female that's not afraid. She's not afraid of this big warrior running into her tent. She's not afraid of the consequences of him coming into her tent. Because it doesn't talk about anybody else being there. I'm sure that that it wasn't, it may not have just been one single tent, because usually there was groups of tents, because the handmaidens and all these different ones, you'll have their different tents. So there was probably other tents there for him to choose from. But it's her tent, a woman of God, that he chooses to go into. And so she puts this peg, through his head and kills him. And so Barak is out, trying to find Sisera, because he knows he's been out. And so he comes and he's asking, if anybody has seen this guy or whatever. And she, and Jael goes out. And she's like, yeah, come in. Here's the man you look for. So, when I was reading this, and I thought,
Could you imagine the feeling that she had just by doing God's work and just
Right.
completing what he had called her to do?
I would have probably fell to my knees trembling at the end of it, just because of the sheer emotion.
Yeah.
Have you ever done something
Yes.
that you're so pumped up for and you're so ready for, and then when it's all over with, you just absolutely fall apart?
Yes.
Like your daughter's wedding day, or the first time your kid drives, or you pump yourself up, you're so ready for this, but then when they pull out of that driveway, you just absolutely fall to the couch in fear and worry sometimes. And there's also been times that God has had me go up front and say something at the church, and I'm so piped up that sometimes I don't even really remember what I said, because it's just God saying it, just using me as a vessel. And then when I get back to the back, my knees start trembling and shaking, and I feel like I'm going to pass out, because I just realized what I did, that I actually was used by God. And it's such a tremendous feeling,
Yes.
not a prideful feeling, but yet a sense of pride that you allowed yourself to be broken enough that God could use you, that you allowed yourself to be that empty vessel that he could pour into to be able to touch somebody else's life. And so when I was studying this, that was the main thing that I got from Deborah, was she was just a normal woman. She was married. She had a household. God hand-plucked her. And then I thought about her husband, Labaneth, how strong of an individual he had to have been to be married to the one and only female judge. Because he could have gotten high and, haughty about it, yeah, this is my wife. He could have also forced her to give the messages to him so that he could receive the glory for it,
Yeah.
But he was so strong in his relationship with God, and so strong in his relationship with Deborah, that he stayed in the background. He stayed out and just lifted her up and gave her the freedom to do what she needed to do to get God's plan in place and to give God's message. And I thought, okay, so she's wise she got direction from God and chose the best possible partner that she could for her life. And Valerie, we were talking about you a while ago. If we wait on God, and if we choose the best possible partner that God has for us, because I believe he has a partner for all of us. I believe he has a very special person that will work with our strengths and our weaknesses, who will lift us up and help us to be everything that God wanted us to be. Nothing more and nothing less. And I believe that sometimes we move forward without God and we miss that. But Deborah was patient. She waited. She got the right man, to be her back, to hold her up, to lift her up. And that's what I want for all of us women. I want us to have that. Several of us are already married, but I want to be David's back, and I want David to be mine. I want us to, whatever direction God points either of us in, I want us to have the strength in our relationship and in our love for each other, that we will just, boom,
Yeah.
hold each other up, press each other through, be each other's partner for everything, just like Deborah's husband was. I mean, we don't even really hear very much about him. But I believe he was okay with that.
Yeah.
You know, I think he was okay with just supporting her and just being in that supporting role.
That's my man.
But we think,
I want that, but not your man. I want that too, but not
we
your
think
man.
as women, though, that
I got the best.
we have to be the supporting role. We don't ever think of ourselves as being able to be the one that's being propelled forward by our husband. We always want to propel our husband forward. But God has a purpose for us. He has a plan for us. He has a reason for our life. Otherwise, he would have created all men. No, wouldn't that have been scary?
Lord have mercy.
You know, just like we learned last week, you know, about having to be in the harem with all women.
Lord,
A world with all men
there's
is
lots of killing going on.
that's pretty scary. I ain't gonna lie to you. But you know,
Be a flower without water.
you know, God, He created man and He created woman, and He created each one of us with a purpose. We were not formed in our mama's bellies just by mistake. None of us were created by accident. Every single thing that we have went through in our life, if we go back and look at it, has been for one of two reasons. Either God created it to be part of our life, or we created it in the choices that we made. And I would venture to say that the majority of the bad things that we consider to be bad in our life happened because of a decision we made
That's right.
that either put us in that position, or we were running from God, or,
Yep.
you know, we just were not making very smart decisions.
Yep.
But that being flipped, that's not always the case, because bad things happen to good people.
Oh, yes.
But the reason that happens is because there's other people who can make decisions that will affect our life.
A lot of people don't understand that.
Those, just like we have a free will to decide what we're going to do, so does Stacy, so does Tammy, so does Valerie. So every person that comes in contact with our life has the ability to change our life, good or bad. They have the ability to cause bad things to happen in our life. And, you know, Deborah, when she was talking to Barak and telling him of God's plan, she could have spun it one of two ways. She chose to spin it as, this is what God has commanded you to do. Yes, I will go out on the battlefield with you, but this is what's going to happen. The death of Sisera will be, you know, will have a different hero. You won't be the hero of this. It'll be, you know, a different person, and that person was Jael. Well, that's same in our life. God puts people in our lives, but God also gives us the ability to choose people to put in our lives. So the people that we choose to place in our lives, the people that we choose to be an intricate part of our lives, we need to pray about. We need to pray for. We need to ask God for direction for those people, and ask God to direct us and give us peace about those people. Because, you know, I know of a girl who was doing nothing wrong herself, but the friends that she was hanging around with were not very good. She got caught up in that lifestyle before she knew it. It wasn't her plan to get caught up into that lifestyle. It wasn't her plan to end up out on the streets doing the same things they were doing. But before she knew it, these people that she was trying to reach, these people that she was trying to offer God to, ended up flipping her because she lost her direction, and she lost that relationship because their friendship and the time she was spending with them became more important than her relationship with God, and more important than her relationship of spending time with God.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. We have to be so careful about the people that we associate with, the people that we hang around with. The decisions that we make in our life are so, so important.
You know, that's really funny, because I was talking with Sam about that this morning. I told her that I had met somebody, and the only thing I had against him was that he smoked pot. Other than that, he's a perfect gentleman. He's a great guy. We have fun together, but I can't be around that. So it's like, I can't.
And it doesn't mean that you don't like these people, or that you can't be friendly to them, but it means that you have to be accountable.
Yeah.
You have to hold yourself accountable. You have to have an accountability partner when you go into those situations. And you have to keep your relationship with Christ in the forefront and make sure that your relationship with Him, first and foremost, is the most important thing. Because without that relationship with Christ, nothing else is going to matter. Deborah could not have done what she did. She could not have become the rock of the Israelites had she not listened to God, had she not depended on God every single day to lead her and guide her down the path that she went.
Yeah.
At any time, she could have gotten haughty in herself and missed what God said and went off on some tyrant. And because of the respect, because of all she'd done in the past, there would have been a lot that would have followed her through that.
Yeah.
But, the Bible never talks about her doing that.
She was humble about it.
She was humble.
Yeah.
That's right. She always made sure that God got the glory. Just like in the whole chapter 5, she's given God glory for this victory. This whole chapter is the song, which I said earlier, some people think that she might have actually composed. But it's a whole song of praise to God. In everything we do, we've got to give praise to God. Good, bad, it doesn't matter. We've got to praise Him. We've got to make sure that we keep, His praise on our lips and that we just continue to lift Him up when He brings us through stuff. I kind of wrote down just like a little recap of the things of Deborah. She was considered the mother of Israel. She was the only female judge. She was a prophet and a counselor. She was a wife. She trusted God fully. She was faithful. She allowed herself to be used by God. And I use the word allowed there because that's the most important thing. God can use any of us at any time with or without our permission, ladies. But do we want to be that willing participant in that and receive the things that God has for us? I wrote she was married again there. She sang and may have composed the song in chapter 5. She was a wise leader. And then I read, I didn't write down where I read it from. It may have been like a little snippet that I was reading about her. But some believe that she was possibly the keeper of the lamps, like early on in her walk. And the keeper of the lamps is it was like what some people what some people thought of as a demeaning job. It was like a low job on the totem pole type thing. That
like
just
cleaning
meant
the church.
like cleaning the church or different things that people don't realize needs to be done. How important they are. I mean, you think about it. If the lamps aren't lit, then a lot of things can go wrong. If the church isn't cleaned, a lot of things go wrong. And I always try to pick up any paper or anything that I leave in the pew. Not because I don't think Todd and Teresa do a terrific job, because I do. They have a hard job here, and they do a terrific job at it. But I put it there. It's my waste. It's my paper. It's my trash. I need to pick it up. And I can't tell you how many bulletins I see laying in the pew. And I've told this to Stacy at times, each week when we do these bulletins. Sometimes my heart just hurts because I think, I don't just go up there and sit and do these bulletins, just print them out. I think about what needs to happen in them. I pray about the picture that I need to put on the front. I pray about the meaning that's going to be behind the words that are in there, or what, every little thing about it. I always think about it, and I put a lot of thought in it, and then we print them and fold them. And then we hand them out, and then a lot of times they get just left in the pew. And it's heartbreaking because these things have a message. Number one, they have our prayer list in them of all those people here in our community and here in our church that need that prayer, that are counting on us to be those prayer warriors. And maybe they're smarter than I am. Maybe they can remember all those names. But I need that prayer list. And I've been to Tammy's house before, and she literally had that prayer list there where she would highlight and mark through. And put stars or something by them, when God would answer the prayers and stuff. And to me, that's just amazing. I mean, that's amazing that she took the time to pray over every one of those people. And then to thank God for, even by just putting that star on there or highlighting it a different color or whatever you do, that's saying thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you for hearing my prayer. Thank you for understanding. And I know a lot of times we think, well, there's a lot of people in there praying for them. And that may be true, but it may be your prayer that makes the difference.
That's right.
You ever thought about that? It might just be that one thing that you say that catches God's ear that can make or break that situation. So I guess I'm saying, think about your bulletins and at your churches that you're in, and think about the thought that's behind them and the information that's in them. Because they're like everything else. They do have a purpose. So we get back to, her possibly being the keeper of the lamps and how that was just like a demeanor job, for a lot of people. But it was so important. And I believe that her faithfulness there is what brought her to this battle. Had she not been faithful in the little things, why would God move her to the bigger
That's
things?
right. That's right.
We have a ladder that we have to climb. We have to show God that we can be faithful in the small things and the little insignificant things in our life a lot of times. Just like with this insignificant tent sitting there, on this hill that God mentioned in the Bible. We have to build on those things to have the strength to go up the next rung, up the next hill, go down in the valley and come back up. Everything we go through in our life, we go through for a purpose and a reason. And it gives us strength and helps us to gain wisdom and knowledge to be able to make it through the next. So, but I said, this was what I had wrote down after I got through praying about this. I said, she proves that any of us can accomplish anything when God is in total control of our lives. When we freely give him control to use us however he sees fit. She was just a humble housewife. She was a positive person. She was probably easy on the eyes, but none of that mattered. She gave God her heart.
Amen.
She always gave praise to God, and she never accepted personal praise to herself. Everything was about her being an empty vessel that was usable by God. Like I said, God can use any of us at any time to do anything, whether we want to or not. He can make things happen. But I want to be that willing vessel that allows him to use me to reach other people. I don't want God to have to go out here and knock me over the top of the head with something, or I don't want somebody else to get to do what he created for me to do because I couldn't be broken and I wouldn't allow myself to be usable.
Right.
So, that's the thing that I have gained most through the study of Deborah is, Lord, just use me. Mend me, break me, mold me. Let me be that empty vessel that you can pour out of. I think that I was trying to think about, okay, what is our next study going to be on? And I have not gotten clear direction from God, so I'm not going to tell you today that I have, because I haven't. I've got several ladies of the Bible that are running through my mind, and the one that I thought was Ruth. I thought at first that was what we were supposed to do next. But then God started talking to me about some unseen ladies of the Bible. Some ladies who held very intricate parts, much like Deborah, that we don't hear about much as little girls. Ladies that everybody knows the story of Ruth. Almost. I mean, almost every young child at some point in time, if they're in church, hear the story of Ruth and how God uses her and brings her up. But I think God is wanting us to dig deeper and to dwell deeper and to see the ladies that are behind the scenes. The ladies that aren't always up front. The ones that are behind the scenes working. The ones that are, doing the things that other people think don't matter. So it's very possible that it may be that we study about 2 people. Martha was actually one of the ones that, because she played such an important part in all of that. Another one was, if I'm saying it right, Tamar. And then there was another one that I was thinking about on the way over here, and I for the life of me, it has just went out of my head. It starts with a Z. But anyhow, so I don't know what next week is going to be about, but I will text y'all later, and I'll post it on here.
You would actually be surprised what we can learn from the bad girls of the Bible.
That's what I was fixing to
I'm
say.
reading a book called Bad Girls of the Bible.
Oh, wow.
Written by some lady, last name's Higgs.
Uh-huh.
A friend gave it to me years ago, and I finally found it, and I'm reading it, and it's amazing what you can learn from the bad girls.
Well, we're
Because
all
they've
bad girls
lived-
at times too.
Yeah.
They've lived that life that
And
we've
she gave it
lived.
to me when I was going through reading
Except for
it.
Stacy.
Except for Stacy.
And just reading it
Yeah.
now is just, it's talking about Jezebel and some of the bad ones, and how our life relates so much to them.
Yeah.
And it's really a good book.
Cool. Well, that may be
Pass
where
it on
God's.
to you when I'm
I was
done.
fixing to say, that's.
But it's called Bad Girls of the Bible.
we
What
got,
we learn from them.
We got 11 and what, 3/4 more, 11 months and 3/4 weeks to continue doing these studies. And I don't know about y'all, but I'm enjoying learning about
I love it.
these women and
I
learning
love it.
that, they started out just normal women like us, just normal, ordinary housewives or young daughters, young virgin daughters, and God puts them in these great places in their life. But there's also ladies like Jezebel who are bad girls. Well, hello.
Here we are.
Here we are.
I was a bad girl.
And I do agree that there's so much that we can learn from them. But I will text y'all and I'll post it on
Hashtag
here.
Rebel Saved by Grace.
Whatever direction I do get from God, as to where we're going to go next. But Zipporah.
Moses' wife.
Zipporah. And some of these ladies I don't even know. I mean, I've never even heard. I've heard of Judge Deborah, but I never really heard about Judge Deborah, and I had never studied her before. So I really enjoyed this. I hope y'all did too. But all right, guys. So I'll post online later on what our study about next week was going to be with. For anybody who's watching, I love you, and I pray that you will just let God be all that He needs to be in your life, and that you will continue to move forward in your relationship with Him. We love you. Bye.
Bye.